Hi, I'm Doug Keck, and this is an EWTN Bookmark on location program coming to you from Napa, the Napa Institute, with my great friend, Father Robert Spitzer. His latest work, Escape from Evil's Darkness, The Light of Christ in the Church, Spiritual Conversion and Moral Conversion, published by Ignatius Press and naturally available through our EWTN religious catalog, EWTNRC.com, all things Catholic, remember. Always great pleasure to see you in person, my friends.
Hi, also
yes,
a great thing to see you in person. I use the term lightly.
That's
however.
right, I know. But, you know, we're so used to talking via the telescreen there in this science fiction-like universe we exist in.
Exactly.
So it's great to actually see you in person, like the old days when you used to come many times to the network and you'd be on with Mother or Father Mitch, and then we'd do bookmarks.
Exactly.
Now, this is the second book in a series of books you have, right? Where does this fit into that trilogy?
Well, the trilogy, this one is meant to be on evil and on the Church's moral teaching. The whole objective behind the series is to really confront, first of all, the complete secularization of the culture, the undermining not only of the Church's moral teaching, but basically moral sanity, the rise of moral relativism. So trying to get a trilogy to respond to all of it. The first book in the series was Christ versus Satan in our daily lives. And the intention there was to point out we do have a spiritual enemy, and here is how he works. But Christ has victory over Satan, and here's the clue to how he can really help us and how we can play into the help he gives us. This book is specifically on using the church, and all the gifts that Jesus gave us through the church. How do we best do that? Not only to free ourselves from evil, but to actually tip the balance in this cosmic struggle between good and evil, between Christ and Satan. How do we play into that battle? And furthermore, how can we lead others into the kingdom of heaven, away from the kingdom of darkness? So trying to talk a little bit first about the church. And the
let me ask you that, because one of the things you say right up on top, and it's a thing I think it's very prominent today, which is the idea, why do we need a church community? Or a Christian church community? Why do we need church?
Well,
and then later on, why do we need the Catholic Church?
Well, first, we need a church community because we are not autonomous beings. We just had a talk actually by Carter Sneed a while back, in which he just basically said this is the assumption of the American legal system, is that we are essentially autonomous human beings with a will, and embodiment is of course completely excluded from the picture. But the idea is that's not who we are at all. We are interpersonal beings. We are communitarian beings. That's the first problem. We can't just sit in our rooms and pray. Number two, because we are imperfect beings, subject to rationalization of every kind, we need a teaching authority in our lives. So I've always said, without the church's moral teaching in my life, I don't know where I'd be today, but it isn't good. I'd be in the midst of the darkness, and it would be a terrible thing indeed.
Well, in the beginning of the book, you give credit to your parents, though.
Oh, yeah.
So how does that relate to the church?
Oh, because my mom was a daily communicant and very, very pious and Holy Lady. She imparted that faith to me very, very strongly. My dad had a great moral sense. He was not a Catholic, but he had a great moral sense. But my mom, she gave me the faith in spades. And of course, that's once initiated, I knew I needed a moral authority. I knew I needed a teaching authority. I have a principle called the Spitzerian principle of infinite rationalization, and I am capable of all of it. I mean, there's no question about it. And secondly, I always think I know more than I really do know, and that's another huge problem for me. And so that's I need somebody to be accountable to. I need somebody to give me kind of the lowdown.
Right.
And the third thing I really need are the sacraments. Where would I be without the sacrament of reconciliation when I was younger, especially, kind of bringing me back?
You really emphasize that in this book. You kind of separated out, obviously the Eucharist, but then you kind of specifically go to reconciliation, and throughout the book you keep going back to that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think there's no sacrament like the sacrament of reconciliation, first of all, to break the grip of Satan in our lives. The idea of getting complete absolution from our sins, to kind of wipe the slate clean, and then the grace to heal all the damage we've done to ourselves through sin. You know, when you're a younger person, you really don't realize how powerful that sacrament is. But as you get older, you begin to see, boy, without this sacrament, where would I have gone? You know, could I have trusted myself to get back on the track again? Could I have gone on a moral conversion track without having not only the assurance of absolution, but the reality of absolution in my life? I mean, I just don't think so. And then it's all linked back to Jesus himself in John, I think it's 21:21, or John 20:21, where Jesus breathes on them, gives them the Holy Spirit, and says, whatever whoever sins you forgive are forgiven them. Whoever sins you retain are retained.
And was it you who decided to put John 8:12? Jesus spoke, saying, "I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." But why does it always seem to be the light is only like a lamp unto our feet? It never seems to show all the way to the end. It's always just in front of us.
Well, because we don't even have the capacity to understand how the end will come. We don't see the various paths that we can take. And of course, if Jesus sort of gave you a predetermined vision of you heading towards salvation, your freedom would be done for. After all, you'd think, well, I'm going to get it made in the shade, or I'm not going to get it made in the shade, and all those things would kind of throw us off. But we are protected in our freedom from beginning to end. And that freedom, so precious, it makes our love our own, but it also makes responsibility for our sin our own. But that freedom, at the end of the day, the Lord will protect it, and does protect it. But the light is, it's pretty much lighting us one step at a time. And we have to trust in God the rest of the way.
It's the trust part, I guess, and you talk about that all the time, right? You say, since this volume is devoted to both religious/spiritual conversion and moral conversion in part 1, chapters 1 through 3, we examine the Catholic Church as a primary vehicle for religious, spiritual conversion. Part 2, 4 through 7, we explore the path from spiritual conversion to moral conversion. Again, kind of alluding to what I said earlier, you make the case that the Catholic Church is the primary vehicle. How do you make that case?
I think it's 4 major areas. I mean, first, of course, the sacrament of reconciliation, the Holy Eucharist. I cannot say enough about that. The second thing, so important, is the teaching authority of the Church that keeps us online, that keeps not only the church unity, but keeps us in the truth. And that's really critical. The third thing that's very, very important too is the call through the Church's spiritual life and spiritual identity, and the multifaceted traditions that we have, the devotions that we have, all of these things. It's a rich tapestry that enables us to interact with God on the most personal and intimate level. But like sitting on your bed, in the morning and saying, "Oh, I'm communing with God," that's not going to do it at all. What we're given by the Church as a whole,
why do you think people want to do that? Is because they're not on the spot?
No, because they want what they want, and they don't want to subject themselves either to a religious or a moral authority outside of themselves. And furthermore, a lot of them are just downright lazy. They actually think, well, I don't have to go to church. I don't have to trouble myself with that. And then, the fourth big area of the Church is the community itself. Therein lies the support that we need for things, or couples link up with one another, or families link up with one another, and all kinds of wonderful programs that bring, religious friendships are the deepest friendships we have. And the Church is, as it were, the conduit, the catalyzer of all these deep friendships. So where would we be without a church? I don't know, but we'd probably be very alienated, very lonely, very lost, totally unaccountable in our moral conversion, probably in reverse direction, going toward darkness and evil rather than toward light and goodness, just staying on our own because of the lack of accountability, and devoid of the grace of the sacraments. I mean, that'd be a pretty pathetic existence.
Well, you say if we accept that Jesus is Emmanuel, then we might surmise that he would have wanted to institute a church that would perpetuate his teaching and graces throughout history. And then you go on about the church community established under the supreme leadership of St. Peter's successors. This is the subject of chapter 1 of this volume. So there's a couple of things, obviously, is indicating, and you deal with it, did he start the church? Did he really acknowledge Peter as the leader? And did that then go on through some Petrine connection going forward through history?
Yeah, I'm utterly convinced, first of all, people, some of our Protestant brethren have said, that this Matthew 16, 17 through 19 Logion, the passage there, where Jesus says, and you are Peter, and upon this rock I shall build my church, and the gates of the netherworld shall never prevail against it. I'll give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatsoever you declare bound on earth shall be bound in heaven, loosed on earth will be loosed in heaven. So you look at that passage and you go, wow, in a moment I'll explain, this is the creation of an office, and the first office holder is, of course, designated by Jesus as Peter. But before I get there, how do we know that this passage truly is something that was said by Jesus to Peter? First of all, we know because in Galatians we see remnants of that passage. We see remnants of the Semitisms. That's the times when Semitic language or Semitic ideas are used instead of the Greek ones. And we see those very Semitisms that go back to an earlier tradition, probably back to the ipsissima vox of Jesus, the actual voice of Jesus. And of course, when we take a look at that in the letter to the Galatians, it looks like Paul actually saw a logion just like that, which is recounted in Matthew. And that is really important. The second thing is, Peter's centrality in the church, and especially in the Acts of the Apostles, written by Luke, it's so clear that he has got some designation from Jesus, something that enables him to rise above the top, something that enables him to speak on behalf of the church when none of the other apostles, including James and Paul, have any such authority whatsoever. So we see already he's a designated one. And then that logion in John, in John 21, Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you feed my sheep? The triple commissioning of Peter by Jesus, not given to any of the other disciples, clearly makes him the head shepherd, the chief shepherd. So when you start looking at this, the first thing you notice is, Peter was the guy, but let's go back to that logion for just a second. What are some other identifications that it came from Jesus? There are things called, Jeremias discovered, Joachim Jeremias, that Abba is a, daddy, essentially, a very affectionate term being used for God the Father. It is so exceedingly rare in the Old Testament times that, Jesus' frequent use of it is almost an indication that the passage being cited comes from that. And of course, Jesus uses two Abba references in that passage. No one has revealed this, no flesh and blood has revealed this to you, but my heavenly Father. And of course, when we see that ha pater, reference, or the pater mu, it's normally a Greek Abba substitute, or a Greek translation of the word Abba in Hebrew. And Jeremias did an extensive study on this, and we see two of them. And then we also say, and I say to you with ego lego, right? That idea of the emphatic ego, the I being repeated, which is unnecessary and great. Lego alone, right? It means I say. But when you put the ego lego there, then that clearly indicates again, one of Jesus' key things, when he makes a pronouncement, when he's making a pronouncement similar to something that is binding, you know, he uses that emphatic echo. That's very much Jesus. Doesn't
right,
really
and you go into that in great detail in the book. Also in here, as you're getting into it, you talk about the last book, the trilogy, the one we had been doing on the show, you talk about the implicit sense of being caught up in a cosmic struggle between good and evil, reflected in the popular contemporary epics of Tolkien, Rowling, and George Lucas. This cosmic struggle. What struck me, but they're all basically good and evil, but they're not necessarily. I mean, obviously Tolkien is in a sense, but the other ones aren't particularly Christian perspective.
No, they're not. I just pointed out because, you know, it's that whole idea of something's going on in our subconscious mind that resonates so deeply with this cosmic struggle between good and evil, even though you know, those texts, you know, the Star Wars things and the Harry Potter things are probably quasi-Gnostic, basically. But nevertheless, what I was trying to show there is it is so deeply rooted in us. When we hear it, it rivets us to itself. And of course, you know, Tolkien has a particularly Christian take on this by comparison with the other two, which have a particularly sort of Gnostic take to them. But my point is, why are Harry Potter, J.R.R. Tolkien's trilogy, and Star Wars the most popular for, you know, stories?
There's something there that connects to us.
Yeah, absolutely, on the deepest levels, and it's inside of us.
Okay, you also in the section, the need for supreme teaching authority and Jesus' intention to initiate one. I cannot believe that the triune God would leave us bereft of a way to discover the definitive truth about how we are to conduct and develop our moral and spiritual lives. And so I cannot believe that Jesus did not anticipate the need to establish a church that would give a definitive interpretation to his teaching.
Absolutely. In other words, you know, the idea that, you know, Jesus couldn't see the handwriting on the wall, as it were, that there's going to be factions in the church, and those factions would just rip each other apart. So you look at the factions in first century Judaism, for example. You've got the Essenes, you've got the Pharisees, you've got the Sadducees, and they have multiple schools within. And what are they doing all the time? They're bickering and fighting, and, you know, divisions are happening all the time. And we just look at the history of the Protestant Reformation. I mean, in 500 years, what do you have? You basically have, you know, at least 6,000 churches, you know, and if you multiply the denominations by the differences geographically, it turns out to be 30,000 churches have developed in 500 years. I mean, it's just like disunity par excellence. Nobody agrees on anything. All these controversial scripture passages. I mean, one church has one interpretation, another church has another. Of course Jesus could anticipate this. This makes no sense to me whatsoever that Jesus would not have seen. If I don't have a definitive juridical and teaching authority, I mean, it's all over. I mean, my church is going to be divided from the get-go. And we know, I mean, look at, even with the supreme juridical authority and teaching authority, you got so many heresies anyway that have to be dealt with. And of course, the Gnostics right out of the chute. So the main thing, though, that I would want to accentuate is not only did Jesus know and anticipate that this was coming, but furthermore, listen to these words that he has. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. What do the keys represent? The keys represent the highest governor's or gubernatorial office that you can have, governing office that you can have next to the king. So if you give this person the keys to the kingdom, you are giving them the keys, as it were, to a prime minister's office. You're not saying you hold it alone. Jesus is talking about the keys to the kingdom. It's already an office of prime minister, which those keys are the signification of the power being vested in the holder. So he's not just talking to Peter here. He is clearly creating an office. And the next thing that Jesus says in conjunction with the office is, whatever you declare bound on earth shall be bound in heaven, and loosed on earth will be loosed in heaven. And so the idea that this connects with the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Now, if you look at that passage and you compare that to Isaiah 21:21, for example, where remember when Isaiah comes to Shebna and he gives the oracle against Shebna. And he says, Shebna, you failed me. You failed the Lord. And so I'm going to do what? Take the keys. You know, Shebna's prime minister, take the keys from you, and I'm going to give them to Eliakim. But not only does he give them to Eliakim, what he says to Eliakim, it says thereafter, whatsoever he opens, none shall shut. Whatsoever he shuts, none shall open. It's right. I mean, if Jesus is not literally thinking of Isaiah 21:21, and what's being contested in Isaiah 21:20? The keys to the kingdom of Israel, the keys to the prime ministership next to the king of Israel. So you can clearly see that if that's what Jesus has in mind, he's creating an office. And he's giving, the first office holder will be Peter, but by no means is Peter to be the last. I mean, why would you create an office only to give it to one guy? That's the first thing.
And obviously, as you point out in the book, you deal with the question of, did Jesus see the church going on after he would depart? Clearly he did.
He did.
You also talk about the fact that here we're talking about papal succession and things like that, and you know, some days there's been good days and some days there haven't been great days, and you say though some leaders in individual church did not adhere to the moral teachings of Christ, the church did not succumb to these influences, but rather rectified them through her authentic teaching and juridical authority, and moved beyond them the remarkable love and faith manifest through thousands of canonized saints. I'm assuming you expect that to be the same situation we're dealing with today.
Absolutely. I mean, I am not a person who is saying, woe is us. I really think, you know, I have absolute and unshakable confidence that God is going to pull this out of the fire. Perhaps not through people like me, but there's going to be a whole generation of saints that are coming. There's going to be a whole series of just unexpected kinds of things that happen in the Counter-Reformation in Europe. Just things that you look at and you go, without divine providence, I couldn't possibly believe that this would happen in a million years. For me, it's like, you know, the Battle of Midway and, you know, having the Americans win this. They should have never won it.
Absolutely.
Anything in an ordinary way of looking at this thing would dictate this couldn't have happened. But everything just went right into place.
That's right. It just it seemed to be. You also quote John Henry Newman. You say, there is more than enough evidence throughout 2,000 years of history to justify a probative informal inference sufficient to ground rationally inspire intellectual, spiritual, and moral conversion through the Catholic Church. Why did you want to make that point?
Well, because, you know, John Henry Newman has this wonderful concept of an informal inference. Today, you know, we say, I just need one definitive proof. But there's like all kinds of proofs. And what John Henry Newman said is, look, you just take all of these different kinds of evidence, right? So maybe you're looking at God, and you have proofs for the existence of God from science. You've got proofs for the existence of God from philosophy. Or maybe you look at peer-reviewed medical journals of near-death experiences that show, you know, that the soul is going to live, you know, after the physical body has died, et cetera. So you're looking at all this evidence, and he just said, don't ignore some or just focus on one. He said, take them all. And he said, do this. He said, all of these things are antecedently probable on their own. But he only claims probability. He doesn't say anything's definitive. That helps, you know, with our culture that, you know, obviously in a scientific worldview, you can't say anything's definitive in science because you could get a new discovery the next day. But nevertheless, if you have them all antecedently probable and they're all mutually...
Are you trying to tell me science isn't settled? I've heard that a lot recently. Maybe I was misunderstood. Go ahead.
No. Yeah. Quite so. The great myth that science has settled everything. So, but anyway, the point at hand is
absolutely. Near the end, you talk about the fruit of spiritual and moral conversion, and this is, you said, the well-known writer on mysticism, Evelyn Underhill, noted that Christian mysticism was distinct from other kinds of mysticism by the fact that the Christian mystic feels compelled to return to the world love and serve in imitation of Christ. And you see that different than other mysticism.
That's right.
well.
And right, I mean, the idea is not to escape the world. The idea is not to become immolated in the divine. The idea is not to have the divine sort of engulf you, take you over as one of those stoic sparks is absorbed into the whole, right? Essentially, Christianity goes the other direction. That the more, in a sense, that we surrender our will to God, the more we become our true selves, not absorbed into God, but God pouring into us this love, which is definitive of, not our autonomy that's definitive of us,
right.
but the love that our self-gift, which is really definitive of who we are. And once this happens, it's
right.
the Christians who say, I can't just stay up here in the clouds. I can't just stay here in nirvana. I can't be in the bliss and escape the world. I'm going back. It's the love that draws me. It's the Creator that draws me. It's the incarnate Lord who gave me the example. I'm going right back into the world. And what am I going to do? Serve it, instruct it, teach it, do as best I can to bring everybody along with me.
And you say that that's the natural reaction. You make the point in the book. That's you want to serve. You say, so what is the solution? Because people say, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Try to be reflective about how much of yourself you can devote to serve the Lord out of love and fervor. And you go on to say, because you end up with the people who maybe get carried away, and you try to deal with how do I know if I'm getting carried away? And you talk about difficulties, contradicting feelings of being overwhelmed, etc.
Yeah, I know. I mean, sometimes we can sort of become so first fervor, if I can put it that way, so fervent that we forget ourselves completely. Now, that's not a bad thing in a way, but if you forget what you need to be healthy, what your family needs in order to feel supported and sustained. And remember, our families, once we get married and have those families, or once we belong to a religious community, we have responsibilities to these things. The Lord obviously ordained it, so of course He respects it.
Right.
So we need to sort of get these things in place. We can't just sort of abandon our work and leave our families penniless, et cetera. We can't also, put so much time that our health is completely jeopardized. St. Ignatius of Loyola was a true believer in penance and things of this nature, but he said, hey, at the end of the day, if you are doing so many penances and you have a rapid decrease in trust in God, hope in your salvation and love, and you have a rapid decrease in your health, that's not what we want here. That's not what God wants. There's only one spirit that wants that, and that's the evil spirit. Right,
and when you're worn down, you're more susceptible to falter.
That's true.
You've got an invaluable worker who helps you through editing suggestions and tireless research. Who's she? Got her acknowledged in the front of the book.
Well, her nickname is the Great One, but she's Joan Jacoby, and she, boy, I'll tell you, she's been the constant person that not only typing at 90 words a minute and just making all these great editorial suggestions, but also draft after draft and helping me especially to do the research. I'm blind, and so of course Joan
Isn't she going to do one of the audiobooks or something like that?
She does all my audiobooks,
right,
every
so
single
great.
one of them. And in fact, this is the next one on the charts.
Oh, perfect.
And she's, I think she's completed the whole audiobook for Escape from Evil's Darkness. And now she's gone on to 10 Universal Principles, and she's going to be doing Finding True Happiness thereafter.
Very good. Thank you so much, Father Spitzer. Just out of time. Escape from Evil's Darkness, the Light of Christ in the Church, Spiritual Conversion and Moral Conversion. Ignatius Press, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. EWTNRC.com, all things Catholic. I'm sure we'll talk more about this book on Father Spitzer's universe in the coming months. And I'm Doug Keck. Thank you for joining us for the special On Location from the Napa Institute. Have a good day.